Did you know that the last movie Marilyn Monroe ever finished filming was also the last movie Clark Gable ever made? The same story, the same desert, the same final goodbye. That is The Misfits. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about The Misfits. Number 20. A script written out of love and guilt. Here is something most people never talk about. The man who wrote The Misfits was Arthur Miller. He was one of the most famous playwrights in America. He had written brilliant plays like Death of a Salesman. But when he wrote The Misfits, he was not writing for the stage. He was writing for his wife. That wife was Marilyn Monroe. Arthur Miller wrote the story as a short piece in 1957 just for Marilyn. It was a gift. He wanted to give her a role that was real and beautiful and strong because he felt she deserved something better than the silly, breezy parts Hollywood kept giving her. He wanted the world to see what she could truly do. But by the time the movie was actually filmed in 1960, their marriage was falling apart. Miller and Monroe were no longer happy together. They were cold and distant. Everyone on set could feel it. Some days the tension between them was so thick that cast members didn't know what to say. So here is the strange truth at the heart of this film. The man writing the words for Marilyn to speak was also the man she was slowly losing. Every line she read, he had written for her. Every emotion she showed on screen was echoing something breaking in real life. It looked like a love story on paper, but behind the camera, it was already ending. Number 19. The Nevada desert almost broke the whole crew. Misfits was filmed mostly in the Nevada desert, near a small town called Reno, and out on the vast flat Mustang Mesa. The landscape looks gorgeous in the film. Wide open sky, cracked earth, dust rising in the wind. For the people actually standing there every day, it was a different story. Summer of 1960 was brutally hot. Temperatures on location climbed past 110 degrees Fahrenheit, that is roughly 43 degrees Celsius. Now imagine wearing full costumes in that heat. Imagine doing scene after scene while the sun hammers down and the ground reflects heat like an oven. Crew members were getting sick. Some fainted. The heat warped equipment and dried out lips and made everyone miserable. Even the horses used in the film were suffering. Water had to be brought in constantly. Shade was rare and precious. Director John Huston tried to keep things moving, but the heat slowed everything down. Schedules slipped, tempers flared. And this was before the personal dramas even began. The Misfits was supposed to feel raw and real, like life stripped down to nothing. The Nevada desert made sure it felt exactly that way, just not always in the way the filmmakers planned. What looked majestic on screen was a daily battle just to survive. Number 18. Clark Gable did his own stunts. At 59 years old, Clark Gable was the king of Hollywood. He had been a star since the 1930s. Films like Gone with the Wind made him a legend. By the time he arrived on the set of The Misfits, he was 59 years old. Most actors his age would have quietly handed the dangerous stuff over to a stunt double. Not Clark Gable. Misfits, his character Gay Langland is a rough, tough cowboy who wrestles wild Mustangs. And Gable insisted on doing much of the physical work himself. He was dragged across the desert ground by ropes tied to horses. Real horses, real rope, real desert floor. The crew begged him to let a double take over. His friends warned him, but Gable was proud. He believed an actor showed up and did the work. He did not want to fake it. The problem was the heat, the exhaustion, the physical strain on a man almost 60 years old. He pushed himself far beyond what his body was ready for. On one particular day of filming, he was dragged across the ground repeatedly while the cameras rolled. The sun was merciless. The dust was everywhere. He never complained on set. He smiled and laughed and told everyone he was fine. But he was not fine. Not really. What looked like strength was quietly taking a terrible toll. Number 17. Filming was stopped for Marilyn's breakdown. Marilyn Monroe was not well during the making of The Misfits. That much has been written about many times. But what people often forget is that production actually stopped because of it, not just a day off. The entire film went on pause. By August of 1960, Monroe's condition had become serious. She was exhausted. She was dependent on sleeping pills and other medications. She was barely sleeping at night, but unable to wake up during the day. Some mornings the crew would wait for her for hours. She would arrive on set, looking lost and confused, sometimes unable to remember her lines. Her doctor and close friends made the decision. She needed to leave. She was flown to a hospital in Los Angeles for treatment. The production halted. Dozens of cast members and crew members simply waited. Days passed, then weeks. John Huston used the time to rest and to gamble in Reno, which was very much in his character. The rest of the cast stayed nearby, not knowing when or if things would resume. Monroe came back about 2 weeks later. She seemed more stable, but the set never felt quite the same after that. Something fragile had been exposed that everyone could see. They finished the film, but the pause had cracked something open. That wasn't just a break in the schedule, it was a break in a human being that the whole world was watching. Number 16. Montgomery Clift was fighting his own demons. Marilyn Monroe was not the only troubled soul on that desert set. Montgomery Clift, who played the young cowboy named Perce, was carrying his own heavy weight. And anyone who has seen the film knows that his performance feels achingly, almost painfully real. Now you will understand why. Clift had been in a serious car accident in 1956, just 4 years before filming began. His face had been badly injured. He had required extensive surgery, and the physical and emotional recovery had been long and difficult. He had developed a dependency on alcohol and pills. His hands sometimes shook. His memory for lines came and went. On set, Clift and Monroe found each other. They became close in a way that seemed almost instinctive, like two wounded animals recognizing each other from across a field. They talked for hours. They understood each other without needing to explain. Number 15. John Huston was gambling while his stars were suffering. John Huston was one of the greatest directors who ever lived. He made The Maltese Falcon and The African Queen, and Treasure of the Sierra Madre. He was brilliant, fearless, and completely unpredictable. He was also, during the making of the Misfits, gambling away enormous amounts of money every single night in the casinos of Reno. Every evening after filming wrapped, Huston would head to the tables. He gambled with the wild enthusiasm of a man who loved risk in every part of his life. Stories from the crew suggest he lost tens of thousands of dollars during the production. Some nights he barely slept before returning to the set in the morning. And yet, somehow, he kept directing. He had a gift for creating space on set for his actors to breathe and discover. He did not over-direct. He watched. He waited. He let the real emotions of his cast bleed into the scenes. Some people thought Huston was neglecting his cast by being unavailable in the evenings, believed his loose, distracted energy was exactly what that fragile group of performers needed. They did not want someone hovering and controlling. They wanted room to fall apart and come back together. Whether it was wisdom or recklessness, it somehow worked. Cameras caught something true. And Huston's wild nights in the casino never made it onto the screen. Number 14. The horses were real. And the danger was real. One of the most powerful sequences in the Misfits involves cowboys capturing wild mustangs in the open desert. Watching it today, you can feel the danger. The horses are real. The dust is real. The desperation in their movements is real. That is because almost all of it was actually happening in front of the camera. The production hired real rodeo performers and wranglers to work with the horses. In 1960, animal welfare protections on film sets were far less strict than they are today. Some of what you see in those sequences would not be permitted under modern filmmaking rules. Animal rights groups at the time were already concerned. There were protests. Letters were written. but the studio pushed forward. Film needed that raw, brutal feeling of men dominating nature and then questioning whether they should. Number 12. Marilyn Monroe's costumes were chosen to feel like real life. In most of Marilyn Monroe's films up to that point, her costumes were carefully designed to make her look glamorous and idealized. The white dress in The 7-Year Itch. Think of the sequined gown in Some Like It Hot. Hollywood had built an image of Marilyn that was all sparkle and fantasy. The Misfits deliberately broke that image. Costume designer Muriel Minnis and Monroe herself worked to create a look for Rosalind that felt like a real woman rather than a movie star. Those are simple. Cotton dresses, everyday shoes. Nothing shimmering or artificial. Was deeply involved in this choice. She wanted Rosalind to feel like someone you might actually meet. Not a goddess, not a symbol, a person. A woman trying to figure out what her life means. This was a courageous decision because Monroe's image was also a business. Studios made money from that image. Changing it was a risk. Some people in the industry thought she was making a mistake. But on screen, the result is extraordinary. When you watch Monroe in The Misfits, you see something you almost never saw in her career. You see her without the armor. She is vulnerable and present and deeply human in a way that no glamour costume could ever achieve. The simplest dress she ever wore on screen. The most honest performance she ever gave. Number 11. The script changed every day. Miller was on set every single day of the production of The Misfits. That was unusual for a screenwriter. Most writers hand over their script and walk away. But Miller stayed. And because he stayed, and because he was watching his own marriage collapse in real time, the script kept changing. He wrote scenes overnight. He added new lines in the morning. He adjusted dialogue based on what he saw his actors doing the day before. Some days, pages would be handed out as the crew was already setting up the cameras. This drove some members of the production absolutely mad. Planning a day's shoot becomes nearly impossible when the words keep shifting. But others felt it gave the film a living quality, like it was still breathing as it was being made. Some of the most memorable lines in the film were written at the last minute. Some scenes that looked carefully planned were actually improvised responses to something that happened the night before between Miller and Monroe. The film is full of people saying goodbye without being able to say the actual word. Looking back, it seems clear that Miller was writing his own private grief into every page. The script was never quite finished. It was just finally filmed. Every word was written in a kind of pain. And somehow, that pain is exactly what makes the film so beautiful. Number 10. The title means more than you think. The word Misfits is right there in the title, but the meaning goes several layers deeper than most viewers realize when they sit down to watch the film. On the surface, the Misfits refers to the wild Mustang horses in the story. These are horses that cannot be tamed and sold for regular use. They do not fit into normal horse life. They are caught and sold for dog food. They are misfits. But the cowboys in the story are also misfits. Gay, Perce, and Guido are men who do not fit into modern society. They are too old for the frontier that shaped them, too stubborn to adapt to a changing world. They live outside the edges of ordinary life, bouncing through rodeos and odd jobs and empty days. And then there is Rosalind, Marilyn Monroe's character. She is a woman who does not fit into the life that has been assigned to her. She keeps trying to find kindness in a world that offers her very little of it. Even the filmmakers were misfits in a way. Monroe was trying to outgrow her Hollywood image. Gable was aging out of his era. Miller was a playwright, making his only Hollywood film. Huston was a gambler directing a masterpiece. Every single person connected to this story, in front of the camera and behind it, was living at the edge of something, trying to belong somewhere, falling just short. The title is not just a name, it is a mirror. Number 9. It was the only film Arthur Miller ever wrote for Hollywood. Arthur Miller was a giant of American literature. His plays, Death of a Salesman, The Crucible, All My Sons, are taught in schools and performed in theaters all over the world. But The Misfits holds a unique place in his legacy. It was the only original screenplay he ever wrote for a Hollywood film. And even calling it Hollywood is a slight stretch. Miller approached the project as a serious literary work, not as a commercial product. He spent years developing the story. He cared about every word. He did not follow the usual studio formulas for a crowd-pleasing movie. The studio executives who saw early drafts were not always sure what they had. It was not a Western exactly. It was not a romance exactly. It was not an action film. It was something harder to categorize, a meditation on freedom, loneliness, and the cost of choosing to live outside the rule. Miller later said that writing the screenplay was one of the most personally painful experiences of his creative life, precisely because so much of his own reality was bleeding into it as he wrote. He never wrote another Hollywood screenplay after this one. Perhaps the experience was too raw. Perhaps there was nothing left to say in that form. Perhaps one masterpiece was enough, the only film he ever wrote for the screen. And it happened to be the last film for two of its stars. A once-in-a-lifetime collision of art and life. Number 8. The film was a box office disappointment. Here is something that surprises people when they learn it. The Misfits, now considered a classic American film and one of the most important movies of its era, was not a success when it was released in February of 1961. Audiences were confused by it. They expected something more like a traditional Western or a romantic drama. Instead, they got a slow, emotionally heavy film about grief and freedom and people who feel lost. The pacing was deliberate. The ending was not triumphant. It did not offer the kind of satisfying resolution that most moviegoers in 1961 were hoping for. Critics were more divided than you might expect. Some recognized its power immediately. Others found it slow or self-indulgent. The massive off-screen drama surrounding Monroe and Miller, who had officially separated before the film was even released, overshadowed many of the reviews. The film earned back its costs, but barely. It was not the hit that United Artists had hoped for. The studio had invested heavily in the production, partly because of the star power involved. Over the decades, the reputation of the Misfits has only grown. It is now studied in film schools and celebrated in retrospectives. Scholars write entire books about it. Audiences who find it today often feel it deeply. But in 1961, it opened and quietly faded. Sometimes the world is not ready for a masterpiece until it has had time to catch up. Number 7. Clark Gable died. Just days after filming ended. This is the fact that haunts everything else about the Misfits. Clark Gable finished his work on the film in early November of 1960. On the 11th of November, just 2 days after completing his scenes, he suffered a serious heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital. He never recovered. He died on the 16th of November, 1960. He was 59 years old. The shock was enormous. The world mourned. Clark Gable had been one of the most beloved movie stars in history. His death felt like the end of something irreplaceable in American cinema. The physical strain of the production had clearly played a role. The rope dragging, the heat, the long hours. His insistence on doing his own stunts despite his age and the brutal conditions. His body had simply been pushed past its limits. His wife Kay, who was pregnant at the time, later said she blamed the film's grueling conditions for his death. Some of her words pointed specifically at the physical demands placed on her husband during the Nevada desert sequences. Gable never saw the finished film. His son, born after his death, never met him. The last image of Clark Gable that audiences ever saw was Gay Langland, a tired cowboy standing in the Nevada desert, releasing a wild horse, looking up at the stars. It was not just the end of a film, it was the end of an era. Number 6. Marilyn Monroe. Died just 18 months after the film was released. Clark Gable was not the only star lost in the aftermath of the Misfits. Marilyn Monroe died on the 4th of August, 1962. She was 36 years old. The cause was an overdose of barbiturates. Her death was ruled a probable suicide. She never made another film after The Misfits. She started another project called Something's Got to Give, but it was shut down and she was fired before it was completed. The Misfits was her last completed work on screen. Looking back at her performance in the film, knowing what came after, is almost unbearable. She is so achingly present. Her eyes hold so much hope and so much heartbreak all at once. She wanted Rosalind to be her breakthrough into serious acting. She wanted to prove to the world, and perhaps to herself, that she was more than an image. There are moments in The Misfits where you can see exactly the actress she was becoming. A woman of depth and intelligence and raw emotional courage. A performer who had finally found a role that asked for everything she actually had. She gave everything she had to that film, and it was the last gift she ever gave. The world lost Clark Gable and Marilyn Monroe within 18 months. Both had poured themselves completely into the same story. Both were gone before anyone fully understood what they had left behind. Some films carry more loss than any screen can hold. Number 5. The black and white photography was a deliberate choice. In 1960, many major Hollywood films were being made in color. Technology had advanced. Studios loved the spectacle of it. Color sold tickets. Color looked modern and exciting. When The Misfits was filmed entirely in black and white, it was a genuine artistic decision that went against the commercial current. Director John Huston and cinematographer Russell Meddy chose black and white to give the film the feeling of a documentary or a photograph. They wanted the Nevada landscape to feel timeless and a little ghostly. Color would have made everything too pretty, too much like a postcard. Black and white stripped the world down to essentials: light and shadow, shape and line. The bleached desert floor and the vast open sky looked more real and more mythic at the same time. He was a master of his craft. He had worked on Spartacus and Touch of Evil. He knew exactly how to use the Nevada light to sculpt the faces of his actors. Many of the shots in The Misfits looked like photographs that could hang in a museum. The black and white also served the theme. This was a story about things ending, about the last of something. Color feels alive and present. Black and white feels like memory, like something already slipping away. The choice was quietly radical. And completely right. Not every story deserves color. Some stories need the light to be harder than that. Number 4. The film was originally a short story. Published in a magazine before The Misfits was a film, it was a short story. Arthur Miller published the original version in Esquire magazine in October of 1957. The story was called, simply, The Misfits. In the original story, the characters are broadly similar to who they became on screen, but the focus is tighter. It is a lean, stark piece of writing, more like a sketch than a full narrative. The emotional complexity that the film develops was expanded significantly when Miller turned it into a screenplay. Miller has said that he wrote the short story partly as a way of recording something real. He had spent time in Nevada and had met actual cowboys who did what the characters in his story do, chasing wild horses across the open desert for a few dollars a carcass. Their world felt like it was disappearing, and he wanted to capture it before it vanished completely. The magazine publication attracted attention. People responded to the raw sadness of it. When Miller began expanding the story into a screenplay, he was doing so with the full knowledge that it would become a major film, starring his wife, produced by a Hollywood studio. That journey from a short piece in a magazine to one of the most emotionally complex American films ever made is remarkable on its own. A few pages in a magazine, and then everything that followed. Small seeds, long shadows. Number 3. The film captures the end of the classical Hollywood era. Historians talk about the end of classical Hollywood, the era of big studios, powerful stars, and a particular kind of cinematic romance. They often point to The Misfits as one of the final monuments of that age. Think about who was in this film. Clark Gable, the last great romantic hero of the Golden Studio era. Marilyn Monroe, the last truly mythic Hollywood goddess. Both of them were saying goodbye, though neither of them knew it at the time. One would die before the film was released, the other would die shortly after. The story itself was about endings, about men whose way of life was already extinct, about a woman searching for something that the world was not offering her, about freedom being crushed under the weight of a changing society. And the film was made in 1960, right on the cusp of everything changing in American cinema. Within just a few years, the old studio system would collapse. New kinds of films, edgier, more experimental, more personal, would take over. The Misfits, in some ways, was the last film of one world and the first whisper of another. It does not feel like a typical Hollywood production because it was not one. It was something stranger and more honest than that. A film that knew somehow that it was the last of its kind, standing at the edge of an era, looking back one final time. Number 1. The last scene filmed was almost too real to watch. The final scene of The Misfits, where Gay releases the last wild horse and Rosalind reaches toward him in the dark of the Nevada desert, is one of the most haunting endings in American cinema. The stillness of it, the night sky overhead, the quiet after so much struggle. What most people do not know is how that scene was actually filmed. By the time the crew reached the final days of production, everyone was exhausted. Monroe was fragile and barely holding on. Gable had pushed his body to its absolute limit. The emotional weight of everything, the collapsing marriage, the brutal heat, the personal losses, the sheer physical endurance the film had demanded, was sitting on the shoulders of everyone present. When they filmed that final sequence at night in the desert, there was very little direction needed. Huston set up the camera and mostly stepped back. The actors knew what the scene required. They had been living inside it for months. Monroe has said in an interview that during that final scene she was not thinking about the character of Rosalind at all. She was thinking about herself, about what she was losing, about where her life was going, about all the things she could not hold on to. And Clark Gable, standing in the dark with the rope in his hands and the open sky above him, was simply there, fully present, quiet and real and complete. The camera rolled. The desert was silent. Two people at the end of something stood in the dark and let the night see them. That was not a performance. That was a goodbye. Bonus fact, the lost rehearsal recordings that almost changed everything here is a story that very few people know, even among dedicated fans of the Misfits. During pre-production, Arthur Miller and director John Huston arranged a series of private rehearsals for the main cast before filming in Nevada began. These were unusual for a Hollywood film of that era. Studios typically did not invest in long rehearsal periods. You showed up, you filmed, you moved on. But Huston believed that the specific emotional demands of this story required something different. The characters were complex and raw. The relationships needed time to breathe and develop before the cameras rolled. During these rehearsals, recordings were made, both audio and some early camera tests. Monroe, Gable, Clift, and Wallach worked through scenes together, trying things out, making discoveries, laughing and arguing, and sometimes falling silent in ways that found their way into the final performances. These recordings were largely locked away after the production ended. The studio considered them internal working materials, not something for public release. Years passed. The people in them died. The tapes moved between archives. Film scholars have spent decades trying to access and preserve what exists of these materials. Fragments have occasionally been described by those lucky enough to have heard them. By all accounts, the recordings reveal a version of these performances that is even more raw and unguarded than what made it to the final film. What is on those recordings is a room full of ghosts being human together. Before the cameras made it permanent, before the world saw it, just people working, searching, trying to find the truth of something. Old reels, voices still alive in the dark. The Misfits is not an easy film to watch. It does not offer you comfort or a neat ending or a story that ties itself up with a bow. What it offers is something rarer and more valuable than that. It offers the truth of how people actually feel when they are searching for something and are not sure they will ever find it. Marilyn Monroe wanted to be taken seriously. She wanted to show the world the woman behind the image. In the Misfits, she succeeded completely, even if the world took decades to fully see it. Clark Gable wanted to go out with dignity, doing real work, not coasting on legend. He did exactly that. Arthur Miller wanted to write something true about loneliness and freedom and the cost of being yourself in a world that keeps pushing back. He wrote it in every line. John Huston wanted to make a film that felt alive, not manufactured. The Nevada desert took care of the rest. Every person who worked on the Misfits gave something they could not take back. And because of that, the film has lasted. It will keep lasting. Movies are time capsules. They hold people still, so the rest of us can keep watching. And the Misfits hold some of the most extraordinary, broken, beautiful people the screen ever saw. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time.